radio for the masses.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army.
If the game is rigged, change the game. Game changer.
I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world.
This is Fade to Black with your host, Jimmy Church, on the Game Changer Radio Network and KGRA, the Global Radio Alliance.
I need your help to get to the year 1985.
You're listening to Fade to Black with Jimmy Church on the Game Changer Network.
Good evening. Fade to Black. Bespoke radio for the masses. Yeah, man. How you doing? Today's Monday, May 18th, 2020. $139 days into the new year. Just 227 days left. We are live from a bunker. A bunker that is somewhere in the middle of beautiful downtown Burbank, California. And I would like to welcome everybody listening all around the world. All across the United States. Hither and thither, to and fro, back and forth, up and down, east and west, north and south, far and near. This is Fade to Black for KJCR, the Game Changer Network, and KGRA, the Planet. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. What is cracking, everybody? How you doing? All right. Yeah, man. What an amazing week we've got coming up on Fade to Black. Tonight, Nick Pope. Going to start off Monday with Nick Pope. He's back with us to talk about the recent Rendlesham revelations. And, of course, we're going to go back and visit the release of 3 UFO videos by the Navy and Pentagon that were officially released a couple of weeks ago. And we'll talk about that and all of the latest UFO and UAP news. Nick is an author. He's a journalist, TV personality. He ran the British government's UFO program, leading the media to call him the real Fox Mulder. He's recognized as one of the world's leading experts on UFOs, the unexplained, and conspiracy theories. Nick is the media's go-to person for UFOs. He's everywhere these days. He's made appearances on numerous TV shows and documentaries over the last 2 years, including Good Morning America, Nightline, Tucker Carlson, Tonight, and Ancient Aliens. He's also written for the New York Times, for the BBC News website, and for NBC's technology and science site, and has acted as a consultant spokesperson on numerous alien-themed movies, TV shows, and video games. Nick Pope gives talks and takes part in academic conferences, fan conventions, and debates all around the world. He's spoken at the National Press Club, the Royal Albert Hall, the Science Museum, and the Global Competitiveness Forum. He has also debated at the Oxford Union and Cambridge Union Society. His website is right there at jimmychurchradio.com, nickpope.net. I would like to welcome back. Man, I'm out of air, Nick. I'm just out of air. I can't do this anymore. How you doing, man?
I'm doing great. I should do a shorter bio.
Yeah, you know what? That was edited for content too.
Right. I really should do a sort of less is more one.
I enjoy it though. I enjoy it. But it says a lot, Nick. You've been out there for so many years representing the UFO community. And this last couple of years has been pretty amazing, not only for the community, but for somebody like me that is turning on the news to get caught up on things. And there you are, right? You are speaking on and called upon to comment on just about anything that is breaking news in the UFO world, which these days seems like it's a daily thing, isn't it?
It is. It's absolutely, and I know this is a little bit of a cliche, but I'm going to say it anyway. It has gone from fringe to mainstream in a couple of years, 2 years and a half, maybe.
Did you ever, that's a great way to put it. Did you ever consider yourself fringe?
No, not really. I was always just the ex-government guy who I guess some people in the UFO community were suspicious of, and others thought, well, hopefully he'll tell us something. And that's essentially my position.
Is it fun to be accused of still working for the MOD? Right? I mean, that's got to be, it has to have some entertainment value for you personally.
Well, I suppose so. I mean, people never tire of it. He's a shill. He's part of an acclimatization program. He's part of this sort of drip disclosure. Still secretly working for the government, et cetera, et cetera. Look, if I say no, I'm not. I mean, what are those people going to do? Sort of turn around and say, "Oh, okay, that's fine. I'll move on." No, they're going to say, "Well, he would say that, wouldn't he?" and not believe a word I say. So nothing I can say or do is going to affect those people either way. So it's not worth my time.
Well, you can understand why they say that, Nick. You're like the perfect guy. Right? And look, if I was sitting around, if I was running some secret government program, whether it's in Great Britain or the United States, I'm going, okay, we need a guy. How about Nick Pope? He's perfect. He's perfect. He's nice. He's intelligent. He speaks well. And wow, we can crank this stuff through him. You're the perfect guy for it. So, for those out there that want to be conspiratorial about things, I can understand their feelings for it, and I'm sure you can respect that to some degree, right?
Sure, yes. I think particularly now I've lived in the US for some years, I think people say, well, that BBC English accent that he has is part of the program, maybe. I don't know. That's what people say. All I can say is, look, I'm an ex-government guy. I'm not a whistleblower. I'm someone who, through just a combination of luck and circumstance, happened to find myself running the British government's UFO program. And I was lucky enough that the British government themselves decided to declassify and release a lot of those files that I worked on, and many of them, of course, ones that I wrote. So I was able to talk about it. And now I see my role as doing what I can to keep this subject in the public eye and hopefully to give it some sort of respectable face where I can. I mean, there are many others doing that, of course, but obviously with my government background, hopefully that counts for something.
Well, let's talk about that recent British UK release. I look at that maybe a little bit differently than others. I need your opinion. What I read, from what I understand, is they released all of the public reports and call-ins about UFO sightings. That's what was released. There wasn't anything released in the deep, dark, bowels of the MOD and the British Defense Department on their knowledge of UFOs. It's two different things that we're talking about here, right?
Yes. The British government, actually starting in May 2008, began a program to declassify and release most of its UFO files. And I actually came out of retirement to help with that and be a spokesperson for it, and did probably, hundreds, if not thousands of interviews on it. And originally we thought it was going to take between 2 and 3 years, and it ended up taking 11. Mm-hmm. And the final batch of files was released as recently as April of last year. And we now have in the public domain 60,000 pages of documents. But what people saw recently was something else. And as you say, this is slightly different. What people saw recently was an admission that there were some files and documents that didn't get swept up in that previous release. Yes, we have some more. We always keep finding, just one more, as Columbo would say. Mm-hmm. And it's largely public correspondence. It's largely Freedom of Information Act requests, but some of it's interesting nonetheless. It was due to have gone on to the gov.uk website by the end of March. Obviously, coronavirus delayed that somewhat, but it should be out shortly.
Do you ever see a time when the British government, or any government for that matter, Nick, would release their own documents about the UFO question and possible contact, the real files that are part of their research, and not Freedom of Information Act or reports from civilians?
Well, we have had, to be fair, in the UK, more than just Freedom of Information Act requests and sighting reports. We have had in the UK some fairly highly classified documents, secret UK eyes only, that sort of level, policy documents, files explaining how those of us who were charged with looking at this for the government grappled with this subject from inside the system. And those have been declassified. Most of them have been released. There are some redactions. So, you'll look at these documents and some of them, yes, will be blacked out in part. But you have had already some good stuff. So I think it's the old saying, the best place to hide a book is in a library. Some very interesting documents have already been kind of snuck out alongside Mr. and Mrs. Smith out walking their dog in 1974 and seeing a light in the sky.
So I guess what you're saying is no. You don't see a time. You don't see a time of everything being released.
Not everything. That not my call. I don't even know if it's the British government's call. I suspect that I don't like to talk about lead nations, but if there is a lead nation, I suspect the United States is it, and I suspect that it's the U.S. government's call as to what does and what doesn't get out there. And I think we're seeing, and I'm sure we'll get onto this later in the show, we're seeing certainly some moves in the right direction, but there's a long, long way to go.
Yeah, and how do you feel about that? The last 2 years for all of us in the UFO community have been enjoying this ride, right, where the subject is out in front and people are talking about it. Whether or not you agree or disagree that what has come forward is even ET related, that's another question altogether. But the fact remains that everything that has transpired has allowed people to talk about this, where it has never been discussed like this before, right? That's what we need to enjoy.
Yes, we do, absolutely. And you're right. And it speaks to the soundbite I gave about out of the fringe and into the mainstream. But look, as you know, 2.5 years ago, if you as a journalist and broadcaster had picked up the phone to a public affairs spokesperson anywhere in government and had said, look, my name's Jimmy Church, I'm about to go and do a piece on this, I need your line on UFOs. The response you would have gotten is, we haven't done this since Project Blue Book. No one's interested. There are no investigations and no research going on. Now, of course, we know the situation is very different, and we've come a long, long way in 2.5 years.
And the push has been, and I know you must have had this feeling too, but that 2 years ago we were on the verge of something really big, right? That this was about to go to places that we never thought we would go to. And I'm referencing, of course, full disclosure, full on everything. It didn't quite happen that way. Why do you think it slowed down? Well,
I don't know if slowed down is really the right way to characterize it, but certainly when the New York Times published that landmark article, and when the existence of ATIP was revealed, the U.S. Navy encounters came to light, people like David Fravor went on the line with this, people thought, right, this is it. And then, yes, to be fair, as you say, there was a sort of, well, now what moment. And maybe we're still in that, but maybe we are still seeing a sort of slow creeping move forward on this. And of course, just literally a few days ago, April 27th, we saw the Department of Defense itself put those 3 infamous U.S. Navy videos online themselves. And again, I'm sure we're going to get into the hows and whys of that. Mm-hmm. And absolutely, there's more to come. There is more to come. This is disclosure. To go back to your original point, disclosure is not a single event. It's not binary. It's a process. And I'm not even sure it's an event or even a process in the sense that the UFO community like to imagine it, with this sort of cliched, my fellow Americans, people of the world, we're not alone. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's ever been about that. I think it's been more subtle, more nuanced. Yeah,
and I agree with you. I agree with you 100%. Unfortunately, the rest of the community, maybe the world, doesn't agree with us, Nick. Nothing short of, like you said, a head of state or the president of the United States stepping up to the mic on live television, uttering those words. Anything short of that is not disclosure. And that's what we're fighting here. For me to say, disclosure is drip, 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 we're getting there, I don't need it, I've seen things, we're in the middle of this, that's not what people want to hear, is it?
No, it's not. Hey, look, there's 3 scenarios. And 2 of them are easy, and 1 is very difficult. First scenario is easy. You find alien life, and you say, my fellow Americans, people of the world, we found aliens. Mm-hmm. Easy. It's done.
Right.
Second scenario is, my fellow Americans, people of the world, we found alien life. Actually, we found it 70 years ago. Yeah, that's a little bit difficult, but hey, you can always spin it. Look, my predecessors kind of decided for good reasons, so they thought, but now I'm telling you it's real.
Right.
That's kind of easy too. But the third scenario, which is where I think we are, is the difficult one. It's, my fellow Americans, people of the world, our pilots chase these things. Our radar operators track them. Our forward-looking infrared cameras record them. Their speeds and maneuvers ahead of anything we have, but we're not really quite sure what this is. And that's difficult because
it is.
Governments exist on and thrive on projecting power and authority. You don't project power and authority by saying, we don't know, there's something, but we can't figure it out. No one wants to go there, and I get that.
And this is the problem with that statement. Either we're alone or we are not, right? To imply that you don't know and you're not in control, I think that's completely the wrong approach, right? Shouldn't come clean on one side of it or the other so we know how to move forward? I would think that's a better plan of action, don't you?
Yes, but it is difficult because, as I say, the situation is literally that if you take it at face value, we've lost control of our own airspace. Mm-hmm. And nobody's going to put it like that. And everyone's going to kind of try and find a way to spin that. But there are only so many ways you can talk that out. And it's none of those ways make government look good, and therefore none of those ways are ways they want to go.
Now, we're going to get to the videos after the break, and I do want to discuss the how and the why, and certainly the who. But what do you see, Nick, personally, when you look at these videos? Are you seeing something that is off-planet? Do you think something is ET-ish? Do you see anything like that is not of this earth? Or is there some other explanation? What do you see personally?
I see a situation where I don't have enough data to make the call. I can say there are probably about 6 or 7 different theories, and we can get into them if you'd like. And there'll be a best current assessment, and again, we can get into that, but I don't have, because I'm no longer in the system, I don't have enough data to make that call. Someone probably does, if not definitively, at least, as I say, in terms of making a best assessment.
Well, I guess I'm asking about your eyeballs. And what I'm saying, if I approached you at a conference and I whipped out my cell phone and I showed you one of those videos, you don't need data or anything to understand what you are seeing. You're going to make some kind of call right there, your emotions. So that's what I'm asking about, not the data or anybody else's collective opinions. What do you see when you see those videos?
Well, I'm going to half disagree with you there. I think we do need data. Taking your point about the eyeball, though, yeah, I look at, you whip out the cell phone and show me that, and I say, wow, great, thanks. That's interesting. That really doesn't look like aircraft lights or a weather balloon, but I know, because I can see that it's filmed on forward-looking infrared camera, I know that somewhere in the US government, the military, the intelligence community, there will be what we call MASINT data on that, measurement and signature intelligence, which will tell me those items of data that I do need to know to make a more informed call on that. What's the distance of this object from the lens? What's its speed? What's its acceleration? What's its size? And only with those pieces of data can I really make a definitive assessment and say, look, is this just some combination of radar glitch and forward-looking infrared camera anomaly? Is it our own tech being blind tested against the fleet? Is it Russia? Is it China? Or is it something else?
And that's where we are left with this, unfortunately. And there's another point to this, and again, we're going to go much deeper after the break. Do you think, in your best opinion, because you've been at this for so long at a government level, do you think that the United States or any government would release a video of a flying saucer?
Well, that's the really interesting question. There are 2 interesting questions here. One interesting question is, what the heck is it on these videos? What are we looking at here? Right. That's an interesting question. But another really interesting question is, if the U.S. Navy and the U.S. government in the wider sense genuinely doesn't know what these things are, why? Why are they putting it out there? When arguably this might be something highly classified, right? Maybe our own, maybe Russia, maybe China, maybe even extraterrestrial. And you've got to ask, and this is the way that government always asks these questions, what are the threats and what are the opportunities? And the opportunity question is interesting. What does the US government have to gain by putting this out there? And on the face of it, the answer's not much. Like I said, it doesn't make them look that clever, because on the face of it, they're saying we don't know, and there's something better, faster, more maneuverable in our skies, and our best technology can't catch them. But the follow-up question is, how is that being perceived in Russia and China? What questions are the leadership asking there? And believe you me, they are asking questions. They must be. And the basic question is, what the heck's going on in the United States with these UFOs?
Could there be a flip side to this too as well, which is that the Navy and the Pentagon just don't care about these videos?
I'm not sure. No, I don't agree that they don't care. But what I do think is that it's worth looking at all this through the lens of an intelligence operation. a psychological operation, a psyop of some sort.
Sure.
And if so, the question is, what do we want Russia or China to come away with out of this? And does the answer to that question tell us anything about what we're dealing with and why the US government would be putting it out? Because look, here's one other really interesting point about this. Every time this story, whether it's ATIP or the US Navy encounters, every time this story looks as if it's dying down, it flares up again. But if you look at how and why it flares up again because somebody in the US government does something. It's like, for the first time, instead of downplaying and debunking, the US government, they're the ones keeping this story going. Why?
That brilliant point, Nick. That is absolutely brilliant. And there is another concern of mine. I've only got 45 seconds, then we go to the break. That there is technology and the ability to pull down any video or anything on the net. Right? We've seen a lot of censorship over the last couple of weeks just over coronavirus. And if the Navy was concerned about these videos, why didn't they have them pulled down in 2007? Why didn't they have them pulled down way before they officially released them when they were already out in the public domain? Why not stop it then if they were concerned about some type of secret information or technology or UFOs invading our airspace? Why not just pull it down then?
Yeah, and why now throw fire back throw kerosene back on the fire and reignite this whole story just when it was fading away?
Yeah, I agree with you. Let's take our break right here. Nick Pope is our guest. And now we've got a lot to discuss tonight on Rendlesham. We will get to all of that. Right now we're discussing the official release of 3 UFO/UAP videos by the Navy and the Pentagon back on April 27th. This is Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. More with Nick after this short break. Stay with us. All right, welcome back. Fade to Black. I am your host, Jimmy Church. Tonight, Nick Pope is here. Tomorrow night, Greg Hausch. Wednesday night, Dr. Robert Schock. And Thursday night, Linda Moulton Howe. Great week ahead of us. Tonight, it is Nick Pope. And Nick, I want to go back and finish our thoughts that we were moving into right before the break. And one concern when you're bringing up, why now? Or why bring it up again? By my count, we now have 3 official releases of these videos, right? There was the release back in December of 2017 and the arguments presented by To the Stars Academy and everybody there. They produced a document and a release form and, for public, and all of that was released and, stating that we've got these officially released. Last year, the Navy, through John Greenwald, said that these videos that have been released have UAPs tied to them. And using that vernacular for the first time from the Navy was a pretty substantial moment. And then here we are in April, moving into May of 2020, and they have been officially released again. What's the thought process behind this for the Navy and the Pentagon?
Well, as I say, it's really interesting. I've done kind of news management, media management, call it what you like, for the Ministry of Defense, not just on UFOs, but other subjects too. And it sounds like a bit of a dark art. And it is, but essentially it boils down to talk up good news and play down and try and kill bad news. So the question is, it goes back to what I was saying just before the break. Why would it be that every time this story looks like it's dying down, the US government itself throws kerosene onto the fire and everything flares up again? And that tells you something. It tells you that there's been a fundamental sea change. We've had 70 years of denial and downplaying and debunking. And now it's as if we've had this 180-degree flip where they're trying to put this out front and center under the spotlight. And as I say, why would they do that? Is it because they know something's coming, they can't stop it, and they just want to get out ahead of it?
Mm-hmm.
Is it because this is some sort of counterintelligence operation? They want to send some sort of message, disinformation, whatever it is, to Russia or China or whoever? Or is it something else? And I don't know. I don't work in the system anymore. I'm out of the game. Pretty much out of the game. And,
did you just slip up? Did you just slip up?
No. But anyway, look.
Oh, that's funny, Nick. That was good. That was good.
I don't know what's going on. Yeah, I mean, of course, look, I still talk to a few people. I mean, obviously, you don't do 21 years in government and not sort of still have some friends and contacts. But I'm genuinely scratching my head here, and I think a lot of people are, even people in the system, and are saying, what's going on? There's something even we don't quite get about how all this is playing out. It's like there's a jigsaw, but there are some missing pieces, and it's not even being played in the usual way. It's that weird.
Now, and then we have something else interesting when it comes to these three videos, and that is Dave Fravor and the rest of the pilots and the crew members and the Princeton and everybody that is involved clearly have some of the most compelling testimony that we have ever heard when it comes to the UFO subject. But when I look at the videos and I hear what they are describing, I'm not sure if what they witnessed is what is in these videos, and we're almost talking about two different situations. What do you think about that? How compelling is their testimony?
Well, I think you've made an interesting point. None of this stands or falls on a single part of the story. We have this convergence of eyewitness testimony from pilots, from radar operators. Then we have the radar data themselves. Then we have the FLIR images, and not just the three videos, of course. I mean, I think pretty much everyone involved with this has said this is just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, no one's pretending there are three incidents where the military have encountered UFOs. I mean, there are hundreds, if not thousands, over decades. And indeed, last year, when the US Navy updated their guidance to their own people, saying what to do if you encounter one of these things, their rationale for doing that was not, we've had three incidents. Of course not. It was, there's an ongoing series of incursions into restricted military airspace by these things, and we need to get to the bottom of it, and we need to try and stop it.
Now, we have a couple of phases of this that you have been right there in the center of this madness. Going back to December of 2012, off and running with the media, right? Every single night. It was an incredible time. It was so exciting. And last year with the UAP designation from the Navy, that caught a lot of traction with the media and the world and the UFO community. 2 weeks ago, April 27th, this revelation of the Navy officially releasing these videos certainly was out there in the media, but the reaction from the world and the UFO community was barely there. There was barely a ripple in the water. Why do you think it's died down?
Well, firstly, I'm not entirely sure it was barely a ripple. I saw a lot, and I did a lot. I mean, my emails were almost constant, and I was getting, maybe with some of this, maybe it's not quantitative, but it's qualitative. So, for example, I was getting requests from the BBC I was getting requests from British Forces Broadcasting Service. So basically forces.net, the British government's, the British military's own TV network and radio station on this. So I was getting a lot about this. So I think it did make a splash. But look, the elephant in the room, of course, is coronavirus. And I don't know. After 9/11, there was an infamous saying by a policy advisor in the British government. And she said, today would be a good day to bury bad news, meaning obviously 9/11's just happened and we can sneak anything out we like because nobody else is going to be covering anything except 9/11 and the towers coming down. So we have to factor coronavirus into this and say, is some of this at some level the US military feeling and the government feeling we can, if we've got things that we need to get out, getting them out now while the world is looking the other way might be worth thinking about.
The timing is suspect, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Although I think it blew up in their faces. As I say, I got these requests, and maybe not as many as I would have gotten before coronavirus. But as I say, it's not necessarily the number. It's who's calling. And when the answer to who's calling is, well, it's the BBC, or it's NPR, or it's British Forces Radio, then it's not necessarily how many people you reach, it's who you reach.
And one thing that I notice, and the barometer that I like to use, like everybody uses today, is how many comments are out there in social media, what's the response there, how many shares of the story, and you can kind of tell if things are, A, important to people, and B, if it gets shared and reshared because people want to have others check this knowledge out. And this time around, as much as I was excited about it, it just seemed to die on the vine. And I was, I was seeing it on the front page of CNN. I saw it on the BBC. I saw it on Fox and Tucker and the media did their part. It was the response from the public without clicking on these articles and the power of the click that wasn't there. And that's the part that really surprised me, Nick. And I can't quite figure out why. The only thing that's in the way is coronavirus. So maybe the timing is suspect, and that's why they dropped the story when they did.
That could be, but I think we still the history of this has still to be written. And I still don't know whether people saw this and they thought, you know what, we have bigger fish to fry at the moment with coronavirus. Or whether people thought, you know what, we need something to get us away from this constant 24/7 coronavirus coverage. We need one other interesting thing to think about. Oh, look, UFOs. So I still don't know quite how this is playing out. And even if the Department of Defense planned this, who's to say they got it right in terms of whether this would crash and burn or whether it would take off?
Yeah,
and
you're right.
I go back to the point, quantity versus quality. Do you want this story, if you got something to say about UFOs, do you want to say it to 100,000 different people on blogs, or do you want 5 minutes FaceTime with the president to talk about it?
That's right. And there's another part to this, and I'm agreeing with everything that you're saying right now. Very, very interesting comments. And that is, with the constant barrage of UFO news over the last 2 years, that maybe the world has been pummeled into submission on the subject. They understand that we're not alone now, and even their interest in the subject may be waning. As crazy as that may sound, but drip, drip, drip may have worked.
Well, I always go back to a very interesting comment made by Colonel John Alexander, and he pointed out you don't shock people by telling them something they already believe. And if what's going on now is maybe testing whether we're in that zone, then I think the answer is yes, we are in that zone. Because yeah, you could say that we've had these stories out and people are saying aliens, yeah, why not? It's not too crazy.
Yeah, exactly. And I go back. I haven't talked to you since this dinner happened with me, but back on December 18th, right, the day after disclosure, I'm with my family here in Burbank for dinner and a cookout. And my family never discusses UFOs with me. They know what I do for a job, whatever. They're not interested, which is fine, right? We don't talk about Fade to Black. But on this particular night, the subject came up because it was all over the news. And my sister-in-law, who has never, ever talked to me about UFOs, said one line to me that I just won't forget. She goes, "What's the big deal? We all know we're not alone." And I just had to stop right there and absorb what she was referring to. Yes, this is big news, but even for somebody like me, come on, we're not alone in the universe. What's the big deal? And that, I think that idea may have compounded over the last 2 years, that it's the same story over and over and over again. Not only with UAPs in these 3 videos, Nick, but it's exoplanets, and it's the search for aliens, and it's fast radio burst, and it's, one sighting after another, that it may be a point of complacency now. Maybe the world is tapped out.
And absolutely, and it's Oumuamua, and it's techno-signature. And it's all these stories. It's not a single thing, and it's not just UFOs. It's the astronomy stories coming out. It's the astrophysics. It's the theoretical physics. It's some of the crazy, weird science in the Defense Intelligence Agency letter to Congress on the ATIP program. It's all of these things taken holistically. And here's an interesting little thought experiment. If some of this is about saying, have we reached a tipping point where people do say, as you just in that anecdote unpacked, is it, so what? Yeah, I'm not surprised. We always thought it was this. If this is a test, and if the answer to the question, if the answer to the test question is yes, we are at that point where people say, so what? I always thought this was the case. It's not a big deal. Then the real question is, what happens next? If it's a test, what is it that they're planning to pull out now that hurdle has been cleared?
And what is next? And certainly with To the Stars and their group, as crazy as December 17th was in 2017, we haven't had anything out of To the Stars since. Has that well run dry? Can they extract anything else from the Pentagon? Will they be able to present more videos, more informations from and testimony from others inside of the Pentagon? Or has that closed down? What's next for somebody like To the Stars?
Well, I think when you listen to the people like Lou Elizondo and Chris Mellon, firstly, they'll say, yes, of course, as we were discussing before the break. There are not just 3 military encounters with UFOs. There are dozens, hundreds, maybe more. So there are more videos to come. People like Lou and Chris talk about some of the lobbying that's gone on behind the scenes with Congress. Chris Mellon has drafted some legislation that he would like to go forward, to make reporting of this easier within the system. There are lots of different things going on. The TTSA have their research agreement with the U.S. Army on the materials aspect of all this. And this is just the stuff they've told you about. Obviously, when you're talking about the spooky world of intelligence, there's probably an awful lot that these people aren't saying. So I think we're looking at just the tip of the iceberg, and clearly there is more going on. We know that the president has been briefed on this. This isn't some wild claim in a conspiracy blog. He came out and said so on ABC News. He said, yeah, I went to a short meeting on this. And no one asked the obvious follow-up question, well, wait a minute, what do you mean you went to a short meeting on this? 2 years ago, the official line was, we're not interested in this. Why are you going to a meeting on something the US government isn't doing? Then we had Mark Warner and Gene Sheehan saying in the Intelligence Committee and the Armed Services Committee that they'd been briefed, various other senators being briefed. There's a lot going on.
Yes, but do you think that the Pentagon and the United States Navy, the Air Force has been suspiciously silent on all of this? It's just been the Navy and the Pentagon. But that maybe these 3 videos were mishandled from the beginning, and anything else is going to be freaking locked down, that there will not be anything else released.
Well, two points on that. Firstly, it was very interesting when you look at the text of the statement that the Department of Defense issued on April 27th. They deliberately used the word unauthorized to describe the previous release of this. What that says to me is that there's a little bit of a turf war going on here, maybe between the people doing it now and the people, and by that I mean Lou Elizondo and Chris Mellon, the people who used to be doing it. So that's one thing, the deliberate, provocative, shot across the bows use of the word unauthorized. I mean, that's a strong word.
Yes, it is.
The other point with this is that you mentioned the Air Force and the lack of the Air Force. Look, here's what happened. The U.S. Navy started issuing these statements, and one of the most famous ones, of course, was when they confirmed to Stephen Greenstreet at the New York Post. They used the phrase unidentified aerial phenomena and said, yes, ATIP did look at this. And this was a sort of, again, a 180-degree turn on what they'd said previously. But what happened was that the Department of Defense essentially took this over from the Navy. And they said, look, we don't want the Navy doing this. We don't want the Air Force doing this. We're going to do this on a tri-service basis. And DOD essentially took this off the Navy. And that's why you don't hear from the Navy anymore, and it's why you don't hear much out of the Air Force.
It's a very interesting way to look at it. And the other part is that now that Chris Mellon and Lou Elizondo don't have an official capacity or an office or anything like that at the Pentagon any longer,
that we know of, absolutely. Much like yourself, Nick.
But the point being, who is on the inside to push these videos out and get release forms signed? If Lou and Chris aren't there, there has to be somebody that is in that position that they used to have, right?
Yes, absolutely. Somebody's doing this. Look, nobody's pretending for a moment that UFO sightings have stopped. Clearly they haven't.
Right.
So somebody is still doing this. The portfolio still exists. You don't suddenly stop being interested in incursions into restricted military airspace. Of course you don't. So somebody's doing this, but as ever, the most interesting players in the game are the ones whose names you've never even heard of.
That's right. That's right. And I often wonder, as we head into the break, how much inside of the Pentagon that these 3 videos have been discussed. I mean, like, talked about. And I have a fear. My Pandora's box is that nobody in the Pentagon gives a rat's ass about these videos. and nobody's talking about them, and that all of this is a part of the UFO community and our discussion. And the Pentagon has way moved on, because the more that we talk about this on the outside, the more that the attention is lifted off of them so they can go and do their other things. That's my Pandora's box.
Well, of course, one person who made an enthusiastic comment about the videos the other day was the president. Mm-hmm. And he said in his conversation with Reuters, he said, that's one hell of a video.
Yeah, and it isn't that you just said, reversal, and flip-flop a couple of times during the show. Couldn't agree with you more, because last year with Tucker, the president said, you know what, I've seen the videos and I don't see UFOs. But that doesn't mean that the pilots haven't seen something interesting. Of course, I'm paraphrasing. A year later, the president now seems to be saying something else. Why would he flip-flop?
Yeah, and if you look, the president gave three interviews on this.
Yes, to
ABC.
Right.
Yeah, ABC News, Tucker Carlson on Fox, and most recently Reuters. On one of those one quote that is maybe most interesting is when he said, our pilots are seeing something, and I'm paraphrasing, but he said, there does seem to be something a little bit different, and we're watching.
Yeah. Very interesting. Very exciting times. It's never been quite like this. We would have to go back to the original press briefings at the Pentagon in 1952. Right? I mean, it's really been that long. Let's take a break right here. Our guest tonight, Nick Pope. I am your host, Jimmy Church. When we come back, Nick, are you ready? You want to talk a little Rendlesham?
Sure thing.
Let's do it. Take a quick break. Nick Pope is our guest. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back, Fade to Black. I am your host, Jimmy Church. All right, tonight Nick Pope is here, and if you ever miss a live show, simple. Go to jimmychurchradio.com and click on the podcast banner right there. Get our podcast. We have over 1,200 shows right there in the archives for just $2 per month, including all of those excellent shows with Nick Pope over the years. That's right, Nick. That's the reason to get our podcast right there, your previous episodes. Do you feel, Nick, as we move on to Rendlesham, do you feel sometimes that you somehow reveal something that maybe later you regret on Fade to Black because maybe I exert too much pressure? Do you ever feel that at the end of the show where you're just like, man, I need a redo?
You know, it's always difficult. There's a line, and I had this discussion with Lou, actually, and you know, neither of us are whistleblowers. Both of us are very loyal to our respective countries, and the point is, we know where the line is. It's difficult sometimes to walk close enough to that line to say something meaningful and not cross it. But I think both of us know, where would be a step too far.
Yeah, well, and here's excuse me. Here's my point. I don't think that any government would throw a past employee in jail or prosecute or come down on them for speaking about UFOs. I just and presenting facts. I don't ever see that happening, because if they did, then that A, that person is a martyr, number one. They fell on their own sword, and it says that everything that they said is the truth. And the second part about it is they would have to open up decades of lies and would have to come forward about them. So therefore, I don't think anybody would do anything to any employee. I don't think the feds would throw somebody in jail for speaking about UFOs in any capacity.
It's an interesting point, and I go back to something I said a few moments ago. Use of the word unauthorized by the Pentagon on April 27th was very interesting, and it did strike me as being a shot across the bows. Look, as I see it, the fundamental issue is you don't discuss classified information on any subject. And as we know, people who've divulged classified information without proper authority, Edward Snowden, Chelsea Manning, the full resources of the state and the criminal justice system are brought to bear upon them. Mm-hmm. Now, I take your point, though. With UFOs, it would be much more difficult because for decades, the government has said there's nothing to it.
Right.
It's all swamp gas. So it would be very difficult to then throw those full resources of the state after those people on a subject which you've just said is just swamp gas. Now you could fall back on, well, it wasn't what they said, but it was what they disclosed about methods and sources of gathering information. But it gets you into difficult territory.
Yeah, it certainly would. It certainly would. But I just don't see, I can't, everything in court would have to come out. Right? Everything would have to come out in court. There's just no way. With Chelsea, and Snowden,
they'd have to close the court. They'd have to, it would have to be held. What is the saying? In the UK, we use the saying in camera. You would have to go into a sort of closed private session. And that in and of itself would tell you something. Why are they going into a closed session on UFOs? I thought this was just swamp gas.
Yeah, I want to get to Rendlesham, and also tonight I want to ask you about Brazil, too, and what is going on down there. Let's swing over to Rendlesham. We had Nick Redfern on the show, I'm going to say 2 weeks ago, discussing his new book, The Rendlesham Forest UFO Incident, and that it's a government cover-up of government experiments, okay, on military personnel. We'll get to that in a second. John Burroughs was listening to the broadcast that night and attempted to call into the show. I didn't pick up, but he did call in the next night, which was open lines, and we ended up talking to John for about 90 minutes. And then last week, we had Jim Peniston on to discuss his new book and the Rendlesham Enigma. And, of course, Nick Redfern and some of the things that he is postulating with his theories in the new book. When you look back, just like ATIP, right, and the Navy, the story keeps coming back. And you've been involved with Rendlesham since the early days. Is this a story that is never going to go away?
Well, to coin a phrase, just when I thought I was out, they pull me back in.
That's right.
And, I don't know how far I want to go with this, but I wrote, of course, my own book on this in, 2014? So what's that, six years ago? Co-wrote it with John Burroughs and Jim Peniston, of course, Encounter in Rendlesham Forest. And we went into, Nick Redfern, I've not read Nick's book, but from what I've seen of his interviews and a couple of media articles about his book, he goes down the road, as you just said, of this being some sort of government experiment, see how people react, holograms, mind control, whatever. John, Jim, and I kind of covered this, actually, 6 years ago. In, I don't know what it is, chapter 9 of our book. It's there's there's a few pages on it, and we went into all this. Ghost guns, the idea that technology exists to project holograms, which would be so realistic that they could be used military purposes. You could fake an alien invasion. You could fake the second coming of Christ. You could fake Russians coming through the Fulda Gap. Whatever you want to do, the ghost gun, hallucinogenic drugs, some combination of this. We covered all this, and we looked at it, and frankly, without wanting to rain on Nick's parade, we weren't particularly convinced by any of this. And Nick's obviously on the outside looking in. John, Jim, and I have been on the inside looking out. We perhaps see it fundamentally different ways, but we covered this 6 years ago, and as I say, I'm not convinced.
The basis of Nick's approach to this, Nick Redfern, which I think he maintained pretty strong during the show, especially with somebody like me, because I have my views on Rendlesham. I think it's the number one or the number two most significant UFO event in history. And everybody is still alive. It's modern. It's not in the distant past. So all of the witnesses we can interview in the first hand today, which we all have done, including yourself. We don't have second, third, fourth, fifth hand accounts that are going back 70 years. This is a different situation with Rendlesham. But Nick has maintained that these are just theories. I have done the interviews. I have looked at what evidence I can, and I am putting this out there for discussion. I'm not saying that this is what happened in Rendlesham Forest. I'm saying that this is something that we should consider. Is it something that you would consider that there's a possibility that it wasn't ET at all and anything else, but it could have been something much more terrestrial? Is it something to consider, to put on the table and discuss?
Sure, it's something to consider, and we considered it 6 years ago. In one sense, I agree with Nick. I mean, all these are just theories. At the end of Encounter in Rendlesham Forest, John, Jim, and I did not say, because it would have been arrogant and incorrect, we did not say to our readers, and now we're going to reveal to you the truth. This is what it is. The honest truth is we don't know. And that's, to this day, the official position of both the British government and the United States government. We don't know. So, yeah, Nick Redfern's right. Put the theory out there for discussion. I mean, we put it out six years ago. Nick obviously has, I'm sure, dived much deeper into this and maybe built on that. And good luck to him. And I look forward to reading it. And it sounds to me, from what you say, as if he's taking a very healthy approach on this, i.e. the same approach we took. Let's not try and kid people that we know for sure what happened. Let's just put some theories out there. And at the end of the day, let readers make up their own minds.
One of the difficult positions that I have with this is the suggestion of a mild hallucinogenic drug being fogged and misted into Rendlesham Forest, and this was part of this experiment. Because as far as I know, Nick, I don't know how much hallucinogenic drugs you have done in your past, but as far as I know, it's okay, you don't have to answer. As far as I know, 2 or 3 people on the same drug are not going to hallucinate the exact same thing. That is where we're kind of pushing the line here, where if you're going to be confronted with a difficult hurdle to jump over, I think that's the first one, don't you?
Yes. Now, there are, to be fair, and you can read this in Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. There are, what do you call them, like folie à deux and folie à plaisir. So there are some interesting psychological conditions where you can get shared hallucinations, not necessarily anything to do with drugs. And then on drugs, that's interesting as well, because of course we know with things such as MK Ultra and the Church Committee, we know that there has been, how shall I put it tactfully, a certain sort of dark past when it comes to all this. And one interesting thing that we did turn up in our book is, despite the Church Committee recommending that all this cease, we found an Air Force Office of Special Investigations manual contemporaneous to the Rendlesham Forest incident, so 1980, which said if you want to use drugs or hypnosis in an interrogation, you should put that request up the chain of command. Well, why that's interesting, of course, is that after the Church Committee, what it should have said is these techniques are not to be used at all.
Yeah, that's right. And the MK Ultra question, especially when we're talking about conspiracies and would this stuff actually happen or would our government do it, through those hearings and the blatant instructions from the CIA to everybody across the United States, which was shred your files, right? And so everything was destroyed except for a couple of 100 pages that are still around today for historical documents, but they prove without a doubt that these experiments were going on, and we know the classification of the secret program. It was called MK Ultra, right?
Yes, and every time I hear somebody say, oh, the government would never do that, I just laugh to myself and say, oh, yes, they would.
Yeah, it's called MK Ultra. Now, there's another element to this, and I did discuss this with Jim last week, Peniston, which is if the use of some type of holographic technology, whatever it is, some type of projection technology, is one thing up in the skies. But Jim had a physical craft in the woods that he touched, that others also witnessed in the woods, Halt and his crew, and of course others. Now, this is what is interesting with that, is Jim couldn't have reached out and touched and physically described a physical craft if it was a holographic projection. This is something else that is a hurdle that seems very high to jump over for Nick in his book, don't you?
Yes. I mean, nobody's denying that holographic technology exists.
That's right.
And I don't like to use the phrase ghost gun, but there's no getting away from the fact that it's a phrase that people with some knowledge of this field are familiar with, and it kind of, it kind of gives a sense of what we're talking about, maybe. But look, that technology certainly wasn't there in December 1980. And again, in Encounter in Rendlesham Forest, we turned up, for example, a document on the role of behavioral science in physical security. And this is all, highly classified stuff at the time. And it turns around and says, look, we could maybe try and do some sort of covert test on the guard force to see how they would react. But it finishes up by saying nobody would know, nobody would be under any kind of misconception that this was anything other than a test. You couldn't really spring it as a real world event. Everyone would know it was an exercise, and there would be no way, certainly back in December 1980, there would be no way of covering up the fact that it was an exercise. So the technology didn't exist, and just the processes and the procedures to do this kind of thing didn't exist either. So I think Nick's kind of, he's found some genuine concepts, and he's put it out there, as you say. put it on the table. But I don't think it flies.
Now, there was a very interesting, for me at least, revelation with John Burroughs the night after Nick Redfern, which was this. John said that the time travel element of Jim Peniston's account of Rendlesham, I'm paraphrasing here, but I want to stay as accurate as I can, that the time travel element was brought out in Burroughs' own regression and hypnosis sessions that he didn't remember. He went back upon further review and listened, and time travel was discussed in those sessions. Now, what do you make of that part of it from John, which seems to further corroborate Jim Peniston's testimony?
Well, it's interesting because John and Jim, as you know, have had a fairly major falling out since the three of us collaborated on Encounter in Rendlesham Forest back in 2012-13, I guess, published in 2014. But the time travel aspects of all this, look, I'm not an expert on time travel. I know that I know that Dr. Ronald Mallet, Professor Ronald Mallet, is one of the few theoretical physicists who's talked about time travel. And there is a Rendlesham connection in relation to the binary code, of course, because Ronald Mallet has said that the only practical way to send a message back in time would be to use binary code. And you basically use spinning neutrinos, which can have a spin value of up or down, and of course that gives you binary. Now the physics of this go beyond me. I know what I don't know, but all I can say is that if John Burroughs and Jim Peniston are now both talking about time travel, and this is tying in with what people like Professor Ronald Mallet says. I'm not sure whether people like Jack Sarfati, who's another obviously colorful character, one of these sort of great theoretical physicists who's in the mix here. Time travel is almost the last step with all of this, and it's a step I'm not sure I dare take.
Why is that, Nick? Why, if the evidence is pushing you in that direction, why not go there?
Well, I don't know that it is. I mean, as I say, there are theoretical physicists who will talk about it, but I don't have the conceptual understanding of it to speak to it with any great authority. So all I can say again is I know what I don't know. It's something to look into, and I don't rule it out. We did discuss time travel in the book when we were looking at all the different theories, but again, I fall back on interesting if true.
And the discussion from John, and I want to say you're right. There was a little bit of a falling out between those two, and it was it was very unfortunate for all of us. That hangs out with these guys to have gone through. But in the end, in 2020, to have John make these statements, John has always maintained, like you guys did at the end of the book, that, you know what, I don't know. I was there, but I can't tell you definitively anything. I can just say that something was there in the forest that night. We were all there. It's documented. It's affected our health. It's affected a lot of other things. Something happened. We just don't know what. And for John to go back to this time travel thing, it seems that he is still trying to figure out in his own mind what actually happened in the forest that night.
Yes. I mean, look, a few months ago, if you'd have talked to me about time travel, I would have really, I would have said, yeah, sure, we covered it in the book, but I don't really want to go there. When you see Defense Intelligence Agency letter to Congress on the ATIP program, when you see them quite clearly discuss and give the titles of scientific and technical intelligence papers on anti-gravity, invisibility, stargates, warp drive, wormholes, things like that, and then you come back to me and say, well, what about time travel? Then maybe I'll say, well, why the heck not?
Yeah, I agree with you. And when we come back, we're going to head towards the break. There was one line in the Condign report that I still go back to. Just one line. The whole report. Okay, all right. Interesting reading. But there's one line in there, Nick, where, again, paraphrasing, but these type of effects are known with UAPs. And to make that statement, and it's a little bit more clear in the report, but what it does say is that the Ministry of Defense has information on UAPs. They know about direct contact. They know about these effects with everybody in the past, and these effects are consistent with their own information. Isn't that an admission in of itself of the ET phenomenon?
Yes, I get that, and we can definitely get into Project Condign a little after the break, and I can hopefully put some flesh on the bones.
Yeah, okay, let's take our break right here. Our guest tonight, Nick Pope. We've got a great week here on Fade to Black. Tonight, Nick is with us. Tomorrow night, Greg Hausch is going to be joining us discussing the recent, very elaborate hack of an entertainment law firm in New York City that went down and is been in the news over the weekend. We will see what develops as the week continues. Wednesday night, Robert Schock is going to be here. It is our Gobekli Tepe special event. And then Thursday night, Linda Moulton Howe. We're going to go over all of her recent research into coronavirus and COVID-19. This is Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. More with Nick after this short break. Stay with us. Welcome back, Fade to Black. I am your host, Jimmy Church. Our guest tonight, Nick Pope. Talking about all things UFO, UAP tonight. And really quick, and Nick, I'm not cool with UAP. I'm just not cool with it.
Really?
Yeah. It just UFO is such a clearly defined situation. Right? Unidentified object. Okay, that's great. But it definitely suggests all of the above, not of this earth. Right? And well, I think and I mean, for me, in a conversation, if you're having a conversation with somebody in the street and you say UFO, they're not going to go, oh, you mean some object in the sky that nobody can explain? It could be from here. No, that's not. No, that's 100%. They're going to think you're talking about aliens. And that's inside of our circles is another matter altogether. But the rest of the world clearly knows what UFO is intended to mean.
Yes, look, here's the story with UAP. We didn't invent it, but in the early 90s, in the Ministry of Defense, actually, pretty much as we were planning the work that evolved into what became known as Project Condign, we decided that we needed to rebrand the UFO phenomenon to kind of get rid of the pop culture baggage that the term had, not with the public and the media. And I don't mean to sound dismissive here, but we didn't really worry about that. What we meant was internally. And so we swapped the phrase UFO for UAP internally. And after I'd left the MOD, and we did this in the early 90s, in, I think it was June of 2011, I was at a closed briefing in Washington, D.C., and I can't tell you who was there, or but literally, I mean, there was a former CIA director sat in the back row taking notes. I mean, it was that kind of briefing, and that was the genesis of how the phrase UAP entered the U.S. government. And of course, as you know, last year, in one of the official Navy statements about all this, one of the spokespeople said this UAP is a term we borrowed from the British government, and we did it for a reason. I mean, it was never meant for the public and the media, but it was meant for an internal audience, just to reframe the debate. And so I stand by it. I know not everyone likes it, but I stand by it.
Now, the closed-door meeting here in the States, what was that about? Was it about UFOs specifically?
Yes, it was. It was about how to take this forward, and I can't go into the details of it, but a number of key people from I guess the political world, military, the intelligence community were there, and I simply gave a very, very sort of straightforward, factual briefing about the British government's UFO program, and one of the points that clearly did get some attention was our dropping the phrase UFO, replacing it with UAP, as I say, deliberately to reframe the debate, to make it sound less like a sci-fi issue and more like a science problem and a defense and national security issue.
Yeah, very interesting. Were they asking questions, or was this just a presentation?
Oh, both. I mean, I gave a presentation, then there was a Q&A, and clearly, I mean, clearly this was taken on board. Look, I don't want to get into the politics of this because I've heard people try and frame this as a sort of Republican versus Democrat issue, right. And it isn't. No. I mean, most of my recent media interviews have been, I guess, with Tucker Carlson and Fox and Friends, but before that, I did CNN, and when Larry King was involved in this, it's not a political issue, but there's no getting away from the fact that I guess a couple of years after I gave that briefing, and she was not at this briefing, but obviously Hillary Clinton did that appearance on Jimmy Kimmel, where Jimmy Kimmel said about UFOs, and Hillary Clinton stopped him and interrupted and said, no, it's not UFOs. There's a new phrase, it's UAP. And I was watching that, and I thought, oh, I did that.
And the interest, okay, so when we hear so much about, especially since December 17th, 2017, that prior to that, there was a general denial with the Pentagon and anything official when it came to the UFO subject. It ended with Project Blue Book. There's nothing to see here. Clearly, that is not the case. But what you're indicating here is that in between Blue Book and December 27, 2020, you were taking part in closed-door meetings between governments on this subject. There's not really a gray area here with what you're saying, Nick.
No, that's a fair characterization. What I will say is this. I have never been involved in the ATIP program. If you look at some of the documentation that we have about ATIP, I'm talking about Harry Reid's 2009 letter to the Deputy Secretary of Defense, for example, you can spot the British influence. And I'm not claiming any personal credit for this, but what I am saying is that if you look at Project Condign, which we did we set it up in the 90s, it reported in 2000. Clearly, you can tell this because some of the text is literally word for word. When you talk about novel military applications, signature reduction, RFI weapons, directed energy weapons, etc. Some of the words in Harry Reid's letter on ATIP, for example, almost word for word come out of Project Condign. And then, as I mentioned, there's the US Navy saying we borrowed this from the British government, this term. And then there's the fact that Hillary Clinton said UAP. There's a new term for this. The genesis of a lot of what's going on now, you can find in the UK Ministry of Defence, in what we were doing in the 90s, in Project Condign. And none of this is in dispute. It's all out there. It's all declassified and released. People can do a comparative analysis, and people can spot exactly the same phrases. It's not a secret.
No, and going back to that one sentence that you and I talked about earlier about the effects of UAPs that are known, right? Known effects of UAPs is a pretty dramatic statement. Is Condign and the release of that report as official as it can be that ET, extraterrestrial intelligence from interstellar space, is visiting our planet? Isn't that what Condign is saying?
No, it doesn't quite go that far. But you're right. I mean, it absolutely goes beyond aircraft lights and weather balloons. And I think the part of it that you're referring to is in Annex. What is it? Volume 2, Annex F, Working Paper 1, and I don't have it in front of me, but there is a section that is entitled Non-Ionizing Electromagnetic Effects on Humans and EM Field from a Plasma. And it goes on to say the well-reported Rendlesham Forest event is an example where it might be postulated that several observers were probably exposed to UAP radiation.
That's right.
And it's there in black and white. This isn't me saying this on your show. This is me saying this on your show and saying to every single listener, go check it out and read it for yourself. I mean, the British government has declassified and released this document.
And how do we as a community, Nick, when we look at Condign and Rendlesham and start to look at the drip over the last couple of years, how do we start to come to terms with all of this? I mean, the question is a simple one. Either we are alone or we are not. And you can take it one step further, that our governments know the answer to this. And it seems like they're trying to tell us something. What do we do as a community with this information?
Well, it's an interesting question. I wouldn't be so arrogant as to tell anyone what to do or what to say or what to think. All I can say is that these documents, whether it's Project Condign's final report, whether it's some of the ATIP paperwork we have, those documents are out there, and I think people can read them for themselves, and people can derive their own takeaways out of all this. And if some people are skeptical, some people are believers, some are in the middle, that's fine. It is what it is. A lot of this is it's typical government, I guess. A lot of it's written in fairly ambiguous terms, and you can take different things away from it. I mean, you can read Project Condign and you can come away thinking it's all weird atmospheric plasma phenomena, or you can come away thinking they're trying to tell us something.
Right. And in reading between the lines, going back to Susan Gao's statements from April 27th of 2020 with the official release of these 3 videos. It's what they didn't say in that press release, which I think is more telling than what they did say. What they didn't say is that we're alone in the universe. What they didn't say is we're not alone in the universe. There isn't a reference to neither of those statements there. And I think that is the one thing that we need to walk away from, understanding that the government isn't saying anything. Even if they could, they are not.
Well, I think I can give you a more definitive smoking gun than that, even. If you look at the January 9th, 2018 letter that the Defense Intelligence Agency sent to Congress, 2-3 weeks after the New York Times broke the story of ATIP and the US Navy encounters and the videos. DIA's letter said to Congress, to John McCain and Jack Reed, your staffs on the various congressional committees have been asking about this. This is what we did under the ATIP program. And then they attached, and they said in the cover note, they said this was a program to investigate far-term aerospace threats to the United States. And you would think, well, that's a good thing. It sounds like DIA being on the ball, and what the heck are Russia and China up to, right? Mm-hmm. Sounds good. When you look at the list of 38 studies that they produced under this contract, guess how many of those studies relate to Chinese and Russian aircraft? 0.
Right.
None of them. It's all about anti-gravity and stargates and wormholes and warp drive. But look, here's the smoking gun. One of those papers was about the Drake equation. And as you know, the Drake equation, it has only one purpose. The purpose of the Drake equation is to estimate the number of communicable civilizations in our Milky Way galaxy. You can call it a thought experiment, you can call it an equation, but that's the only thing it does. It's nothing to do with Russia, nothing to do with China, nothing to do with Iran, nothing to do with North Korea, nothing to do with aircraft, missiles, or drones. It's just to do with extraterrestrial civilizations. And there it is in the DIA letter to Congress about the ATIP program.
And so, okay, so what does that tell you, though? Because when I read the original, and I got it way before December 17th, 2017, I got a copy of the 38 reports, and I read through it, and I immediately called Richard Dolan, and I was reading through this, and I sent it to Richard, and then we got back to each other. What do you think? And I said, well, you know what? I'm just reading science fiction. I'm reading a bunch of physicists and scientists theoretically projecting 20 years into the future about technology that we could be dealing with here on Earth. What I didn't see in that, and ATIP and everything else, that was a few months ahead. We hadn't experienced that yet. Leslie Kane hadn't written her article and so forth. But when I was reading through that, I said, there's nothing here that says UFOs. There's nothing in this entire document that says anything about ET. This is nothing but science fiction talking about, like you said, Nick, wormholes and warp drives and stargates. Great reading. It's great science fiction. It's awesome. It's a projection into the future about possibilities and probabilities, but it has nothing to do with ETs or UFOs. And so going back to Congress and these letters that were going back and forth, I feel aerospace there, but I don't see ET.
Well, that's where I come back to the point about the Drake equation. You could argue with just about all of the other papers, mm-hmm. right? All 38 of them. If you look down the list, you could say, well, warp drive, maybe, and I think the figure was 40 years, by the way. But,
yeah, 40.
But you could say, look, maybe in 40 years' time, this will be the sort of thing that Russia and China is looking at. And, therefore we need to be looking at it too. Fair enough. But I come back to the Drake equation. And the reason I come back to it is there's no middle ground with the Drake equation. You can study wormholes. You can study warp drive. You can study anti-gravity. You can study invisibility. And you could argue, yeah, this has nothing to do with ET. This could be answering the question, what might Russia and China have in 40 years' time? But you cannot look at the Drake equation and say that that's about Russia and China. It is only about extraterrestrial civilizations.
Yeah.
So you had the answer. Everyone had the answer who had this list of 38 studies. They had the answer, but they didn't ask the right question.
Well, I'm going to go back and take another look. That's a very interesting take on it.
And by the way, I should say, the current position, and you mentioned Susan Gao, the current position of the Department of Defense is that neither ATIP nor ORSAP, the ATIP contract, were UAP related. They've flip-flopped on that. I put to them, I said, if this is true, why were you studying the Drake equation? What's that got to do with Russia and China? And they said, we'll get back to you on that. And that was like about 3-4 months ago. So look, the Pentagon is currently redrafting their position statement on ATIP to address my question of why they would be looking at the Drake equation if this was really just about next generation aviation threats. So that statement, it may come tomorrow, it may be next week, it may be a couple of weeks, but it will come. It will have to come, and that might tell us some more.
And there was another, staying on Susan Gao for a second, and I can't believe we didn't get to Brazil. Since you're in for coronavirus, can I get you to stay over for a little overtime? I want to discuss what's going down in Brazil.
I have to say, I don't know. I'm following the story, but I have not yet looked into it personally. Yeah. So I'm not sure I can add much to the Brazil story.
Yeah, not a problem. Not a problem. Your insight, whatever it may be, it will be interesting. But back to Susan Gao. There is a line in her statement that I think is the most telling, which is, and again, I'm paraphrasing. I don't have it in front of me. I should pull it up. But she says that there is nothing in these 3 videos revealing any sensitive technologies. Now, that's a pretty interesting statement, isn't it? I mean, if it was ETs or if it was Russian or technology of ours that we didn't want anybody else to see, then why put that statement in there? There's nothing in these videos that is revealing anything sensitive or secretive or technologies. Why put that in the statement if it didn't need to be there?
Well, that's part of standard government policy to downplay the whole UFO phenomenon and make it sound as unexciting and as low classification as possible. And it's a truthful statement. There's nothing, those videos are unclassified. What she didn't say was that videos associated or a video associated with this, but not one of these 3 videos, is secret, and various briefing slides associated with these 3 videos are classified top secret. And the definition, as you know, of top secret is information the disclosure of which would cause exceptionally grave damage to the national security of the United States.
I think I have the statement here. Okay, let me let me get to it. Okay, well, that wasn't it. Okay, stay with me, Nick. I have my show notes from that night. I probably Okay, she says this. After a thorough review, the department has determined that the authorized release of these unclassified videos does not reveal any sensitive capabilities or systems and does not impinge on any subsequent investigations of military airspace incursions by unidentified aerial phenomenon. That's
true.
Yeah.
That's true. But the real question is, well, that's fine, but what does the secret video and the top secret briefing slide relating to this, what did they reveal?
Yes, well, and why make the statement that it does not reveal any sensitive capabilities or systems? Certainly, an ET situation would have highly sensitive capabilities and technology.
You would think, absolutely.
Yeah, it's a very interesting statement. And the other part about this that I thought was something that should have been talked about more is that John Greenwald was pushing for this FOIA release and statement on these 3 videos, and he got the FOIA release the same day as the statement from Susan Gao and the official release of the videos, that the 2 of them happened at the same day. Do you think that this official release would have happened if John Greenwald was not pushing for a FOIA release on these?
I don't know about that. I mean, I think sometimes, you could say that the Department of Defense might like to put something out themselves to maybe, I don't know, overshadow some of the work being done by people in the UFO community, whether it's John Greenwald, Tim McMillan, whoever it might be. It's part of, well, if they think they've got a story, here's a bigger one. And of course, the DoD will always be able to get their quotes into the mainstream media. Yeah.
So you think that's why they happened on the same day?
Could be.
Very interesting. And Nick, real quick before the break, and we'll come back and discuss Brazil briefly, is there a UFO researcher out there that for you today is somebody that not only that you respect for their information, but do you ever pick up the phone and call somebody and go, man, I've got a question, what do you know?
Well, I can't say as I pick up the phone to people, but I suppose if it was going to be anyone, and this is not a UFO researcher, but if I was going to pick up the phone to anyone, I guess I would pick up the phone to Lou and talk to him on a sort of, government to government basis and say there are fundamental differences between the programs that we ran, but I think we understand, we speak the same language, we're immersed in the same culture. So I would probably pick up the phone to Lou.
Lou Elizondo. Interesting answer. There you go. Nick Pope, stay right there. Let's take our break. And when we come back, everybody, the internet has gone crazy with what is going on down there in Brazil. I have looked at the videos. I've had some videos sent to me personally. And reviewing these and looking at how it's being censored on the internet and what may or may not be going on down there in Mage, which is just north of Rio de Janeiro, is something that we all need to take a look at. Something happened down there in Mage. Our guest tonight, Nick Pope, will talk about Brazil when we come back after this short break. Stay with us. Welcome back, Fade to Black. I am your host, Jimmy Church. Tonight, Nick Pope is with us, doing a little overtime. Lots of UFO news that's going on right now. And it all started last Wednesday down in Mage, Brazil. And Nick, on Thursday morning, I got an email that had a video in it that was shot the night before of what clearly appears to me, to be a meteor turning into a meteorite as it crashed into this mountainside down in Mage. what had happened on Wednesday, the night before, I was inundated with different links to these Twitter videos of people all over this town of Mage, north of Rio de Janeiro, with lights in the sky. So the Wednesday night I was looking at these videos, and, all interesting. We've seen lights in the sky videos before, different round glowing objects, different colors. And then this video pops up the next day of this thing crashing into the side of the mountain. A very strange coincidence to be happening at the same time. What are the odds, right? What are the odds of a meteor crashing into your town in the middle of a UFO flap, right? Now, the lights have been seen by thousands of people, and they were posted up all over the place. And a lot of these videos were censored and pulled down off of the net. And I know that you've read these reports. From what you have seen so far, what do you think may or may not be going on?
Well, I think like a lot of the UFO phenomenon, it's sort of 95% noise, 5% signal. And I put my hand up and confess, I simply have not had time to look into this personally. I mean, I've been tied up with a whole bunch of other things. I'm still dealing with media requests for the Pentagon story. So I've been totally engaged on that. And now, every time I put something up, I tell you what, I even put some photos up of some rock squirrels at our place in Tucson. And under the comments I get, but what do you think about what's going on in Brazil? I can't do anything without getting drawn into this. I don't know. I've not yet had time to look into it personally. It's interesting. I'm following it carefully, but I have not looked into it personally. I don't have any inside information from any of my former colleagues in government, military, intelligence community. So I can't add anything to this particular story.
Doesn't Brazil, historically speaking, like Argentina and like Chile, take the subject of UFOs and ET very seriously, and they are okay with discussing things with the public, right? Historically, that has been what has come out of Brazil, right?
Yes, absolutely. And it's a cultural thing. I was in Brazil for a couple of weeks last year at the invitation of H.A. Guevara, and we went around a number of different cities there: Curitiba, Recife, Sao Paulo, and some other places. And I really got a sense of the Brazilian culture and the people and the great hospitality and marvelous people down there. And it is very different. There is a real difference in openness about this. But none of that, I'm afraid, gives me an insight into what's just happened down there. But it does tell me that absolutely the government has taken it seriously. The military has investigated. Of course, we know that the To the Stars campaign and to the Stars Academy have looked at this, and they've been down there too. So interesting times, some interesting things going on down there for sure.
Yeah, why is it? And I made this comment, well, a couple of times over the last couple of weeks. But the UFO ufology and this community, every time it seems that we're starting, excuse me, something in my throat. Every time that we start to settle down and relax, there's another big story and something breaking that gets your heart and your adrenaline pumping more than things in the past. It's like the gift that keeps on giving. Right? Do you feel the same thing, that it's not going to go away, that things are going to continue to get more serious and more revealing?
Yes, I often like to say when people say, what do you think's coming next? When is the other shoe going to drop? Whatever the phrase people use. I always remind folks that this is an events-led field. And I've often said, maybe this will turn out to be a true prediction with what's going on in Brazil. But I always say one never knows suddenly and unexpectedly from left field when the next Roswell or the next Rendlesham Forest will suddenly come.
Do you think that Roswell was the ability to learn the art of the cover-up? And not to say that Roswell was alien and ET or that it wasn't, but certainly the story changed many times all the way up to the GAO report in the 90s, where the story constantly changed with Roswell. Was that how the art of the cover-up with this stuff started?
I don't know that it's how it started, but it was certainly where it was demonstrated. And as you say, one doesn't need to postulate that this was extraterrestrial or terrestrial or whatever to say that undoubtedly this is a perfect example of where there was one story on day one and a completely different story on day two. And the flip took place almost seamlessly. And so, yes, answering your question, absolutely. If it's not where the art of the cover-up was born or even perfected, it was certainly where it was eloquently demonstrated.
Why is it that, Nick, it doesn't matter, it doesn't matter what the subject is with ufology or wherever your research is leading you, wherever you go in any direction, the trail doesn't end, right? That nothing gets resolved. Why is that?
Well, because this is a story that's still being written. And it's a story that has a beginning and a middle, but we don't yet have the end.
Yeah, because a classic example of that is one that is, the most tangible, which is Rendlesham, right? It's right there in front of us. It's right there. All of the evidence and the research that we can handle is right in front of us, and we still can't get to the bottom, right?
Exactly.
We can't.
You might say, what more do people want? But yeah, there is always more. There'll always be a new witness, a new document, a new theory. And we're coming up to the 40th anniversary this December. And my goodness, perhaps you and I will be doing interviews about this when we come up to the 80th anniversary.
Yeah, we certainly will. Yeah, we certainly will. And what is your explanation for? I've done interviews not only with you, but every player in Rendlesham. I've done stuff privately. I've done stuff off of the record. And have had things revealed to me. But the one thing that I have walked away from is that nobody at Rendlesham has a shared experience. Why don't you find that the most interesting? That everybody has a different recollection and a different take on Rendlesham Forest.
Absolutely. I don't want to quote myself, and I certainly don't want to misquote myself, but I think I am going to. Somewhere in Encounter in Rendlesham Forest, where I talk about the first night, Burroughs, Penniston, and Kavanasak, I write a line, and it's something like 3 people walked into the forest that night, and each of them came out with a different story. And that's not to say any of them were making anything up. What I'm talking about there is firstly the fact that these people are different individuals, different characters, different personalities, different perceptions and belief systems. But secondly, who's to say that they did actually experience the same thing? There's always the kind of the variable, the trickster, the uncertainty principle with a lot of this, and we just don't know. Sometimes it's not what you want to hear. People like neat answers and perfect solutions, but I'm sorry, in this subject, that's not what you're dealing with.
And there is, and I can throw myself into this section of people. It is very difficult to change our minds once they've been made up, right? I've been looking at Rendlesham since it first surfaced. I've looked at and listened to and spoke to, all of this evidence, and I've come to my own conclusions. And then and I'm just like everybody else in the UFO community, Nick. And then he suggests something like time travel from Peniston, and I have to back up. I listen to everybody, but is this enough for me to change my mind when indeed he was there? I wasn't there, and neither was the rest of the UFO community, and that includes Nick Redfern in the new book. It's people's belief systems are going to be what they are, and it is difficult to change them, and that includes all of the witnesses, right?
It does, but you know what? If my government involvement in this has taught me one thing, it's taught me that when I hear somebody say, "I don't know," or "I've changed my mind," I pay more attention to that person than I do to the person who jabs his finger at me and says, "Let me tell you what this was."
Right. Yeah, truer words have never been spoken. And I try to instill that in everybody because now, today, I'm not necessarily leaning on a government experiment, but the time travel aspect, as suggested by Peniston, is something that we need to take a closer look at. And we can't dismiss that, and certainly we can't dismiss the one witness that was physically there touching this craft. We have to listen to him more closely than others, I would think, right?
Indeed. Those who were there should be listened to.
Now, when you were at the MOD, and I know that you've been presented these questions or these ideas for a long time, but how was the MOD looking at Rendlesham?
From a defense and national security perspective, all these events were looked at in that way. These were in and of themselves incursions into the United Kingdom air defense region and were treated as such.
But was there a United States Air Force aspect to this too as well, even though it happened on the other side of the fence? Right?
Absolutely, yes. I mean, this was British soil, but USAF bases, and there was a whole bunch of agreements and legislation. The overarching agreement was the NATO Status of Forces agreement, but many different agreements and memoranda of understanding governing the very, very complex legal, procedural, administrative interrelationship between the British and the American government here.
Now, much has been made with Malmstrom and UFO activity over different nuclear missile sites, well documented and discussed for many years, and you're familiar with all of that. But certainly this question has come up with Woodbridge and Rendlesham, whether there was nuclear weapons there or not. The official stance is there wasn't. There was no nuclear weapons by the United States Air Force on British soil. Was this a concern for the MOD when these revelations started to show up?
Well, I'm fairly sure that the line was that we neither confirm nor deny the presence of nuclear weapons at any specific location at any particular time. And that's a line that I'm going to have to speak to. Right.
But I'm speaking directly about the UFO aspect of this. When Colonel Haltz, as you're well aware of, said that there were lights above these ammunition bunkers that were beaming down lights towards these facilities. That would indicate that they were looking at the weapons, nuclear or not, right?
Yes, Colonel Holt has certainly referred, as have others, to the weapon storage areas. But I think Colonel Holt and I are very, very careful not to discuss what specific types of ordnance may or may not have been involved.
Yeah, and he has stated that very clearly on this show. He will not go there, which I understand. But it seems to me that if this is ET, that they are really interested in our technology and our research, and certainly offensive and defensive weapons, that the curiosity seems to be there for them, doesn't it?
Well, I think one can make very few realistic assumptions about what an extraterrestrial civilization may or may not be interested in from a sort of scientific, technical, anthropological perspective. But I think one thing that you could say is a fair assumption is that they would be interested in the cutting edge of our technology and in any technology that might pose a threat.
Yeah, because I don't hear reports about UFOs over a donut factory, right?
That's because they've been covered up, Jimmy. We all know that.
Yeah, and I always find that interesting, and that the focus, even for civilians that have nothing to do with the military and they don't follow that aspect of our lives, but their reports and the things that they have seen over military installations is always very interesting to me, because I don't hear about, an alien abduction at a McDonald's or an In-N-Out burger in downtown Tucson. I don't hear those reports. It's always an interest in our technology.
Yes, I think that's a fair assumption.
Nick Pope, what's next for you? Now, I know that how are you doing with this stay-at-home stuff? Are you behaving, and have you gotten your hair cut?
Well, you know what? Elizabeth cuts my hair all the time anyway, has done for years, so and very well too, I should say. And so everything you see on TV is all hair by Elizabeth. So no change there. I'm pleased to say that curve is being flattened. We've done our 14-day national shutdown, which mysteriously segued into 2 months, but that's another story. And Arizona, certainly where I am now, is reopening. So that's all good.
Are you going to be speaking? Are you going to start to venture out? Is there anything that you're going to be doing in 2020?
Oh, well, we're venturing out anyway. I mean, this is a whole nother show, of course, and whether you agree or not, but I think unless you're in one of the categories, sadly, but genuinely affected by this, you're not at any particular risk. So I'm not worried, but obviously we have to follow whatever regulations are sort of put down, and it may well be that the conference and convention scene is on hold for a while longer. That's fine. I'm still doing various other things. I'm doing, obviously, one thing that you've probably seen a lot of is The Basement Office, this new series that Stephen Greenstreet at the New York Post and I are doing. So that's fun and interesting. Conferences will be back, I'm sure, hopefully later this year, if not back with a vengeance in 2021. I think people miss that sort of personal interaction, that socializing, and we'll be ready to rock when everything gets back to normal.
Where can everybody see the Basement series?
It's on the New York Post's website and on their YouTube channel, and also Stephen Greenstreet, who's the creator and host of this, and and myself, we tweet it when every episode goes live, and the new episodes go live every Wednesday.
Yeah, I've been watching them, and I got to say, really good stuff, Nick.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been a real sort of left field hit. People are very used to the kind of traditional format of UFO shows on TV. This is something new, and it seems to have bridged the gap between the newcomers and the deep specialists, both of whom like it, and that's a really tough balance to get right.
Yeah, do you think that now that you guys are venturing into this, and it is great, and the views out there have been, and the response has been really cool, but on the other side of all of this is what YouTube and Twitter and Facebook and others that are dealing with some of these topics with censorship. Do you think that is something that maybe Facebook and everybody should back off of, the censorship in these fringe areas?
Yeah, I think unless something really literally physically harms someone, one should take a very hands-off approach with this sort of thing. And I think certainly the basement office has really, I think, given people insight into this, newcomers and old hands alike.
Yeah, thank you so much, Nick. What a great conversation. And everything is over at nickpope.net, too, as well. And the links are over at jimmychurchradio.com. Nick, be safe out there, and I look forward to seeing you soon.
Thanks,
it's
Jimmy.
Been too long.
It's been great to chat to you again.
You're the best. Thank you, Nick. Nick Pope. And again, nickpope.net. The links are over at jimmychurchradio.com. What a great conversation. Now, a couple of takeaways before we sign off tonight. I know that everybody caught this, and I was watching the action there on Twitter when Nick said, and I'm wondering what kind of slip it was, where he said that he was mostly gone. Now, I'm not here to put suspicion on whether Nick is still with the MOD or not. He has clearly retired. That part I have no issue with at all. But I think he has the ability to reach out when he has to. Or the flip side, that they know Nick is well-spoken and he is listened to and respected in the UFO community. And if there is something that needs to be said, maybe it's back-channeled to him. And I would hope that is the way that it is. I don't look at it any other way. I enjoyed the slip, though. And that is the one thing about live radio. There are no takebacks. You can't do an overdub. You can't punch in the vocals. You can't click rewind. And we all caught that, and he caught himself too. But I think that is a very revealing statement in that, well, yeah, mostly. But you would hope that Nick does have access and that people have access to him if need be. And I think that is probably the mostly comment. I'll leave it up to the rest of you to read into that, but I really enjoyed it. And that is the best part of live radio, when something like that happens. So there you go. Again, we have an amazing week here coming up on Fade to Black. Of course, tonight, Nick Pope. Tomorrow night, Greg Hausch is here. And what is happening right now, and the news of this over the weekend as it broke was absolutely shocking. And to have our evil, a hacking group, successfully get to Rob Grubman and his New York entertainment law firm that represents the very top of the entertainment industry, and to get 700 gigabytes of personal data from his systems that were supposedly very secure and locked down, and then to turn around and double the ransom from $21 million to 42, stating that they had dirt on President Trump. This is what is interesting about that, and why we're bringing Greg on to the show tomorrow night. One is to how you breach the security and the significance of it. But the other part of it is there was nothing that was done wrong. Normally, by this law firm, normally these hacks happen because they need to make an example of somebody, and somebody misbehaved. That clearly isn't the case here. And second, President Trump was never a client of theirs. Well, at least that we know of. But what was in these files that apparently are evil felt that they needed to double the ransom from $21 million to $42 million. And this is the next part of this question. Okay? Are evil, there's a problem with both sides. Our evil needs to call their own bluff. They said 7 days, pay up, or we're going to reveal this dirt. If they're not paid up in 7 days, our evil's got to represent the hacker community. You can't wuss out. And on the other side, and that is with the law firm, they have to stick to their guns, right? You can't pay a ransom, can you? Because if you do, there's no guarantee that these files are never going to see the light of day. It's a very perplexing paradox that everybody concerned here finds themselves in. And that's why Greg Hausch is here tomorrow night. And let's see, Wednesday night, Robert Schock. Thursday night, Linda Moulton Howe. Fade to Black's executive producers, Rita Kamurian. Show is produced by Hilton J. Palm, Renee, Dennis, and Kevin. Announcers are Steve Harder, Gene Vitola, Mark D. Kovar. The webmaster is Drew the Geek. Music, Doug Aldrich. Intro, Spaceboy, spaceboymusic.com. Fade to Black is produced by KJCR for the Game Changer Network, and syndication is KGRA, The Planet. This broadcast owned and copyrighted 2020 by Fade to Black and the Game Changer Network, Inc. It cannot be rebroadcast, downloaded, copied, or used anywhere in the known universe without written permission from Fade to Black or the Game Changer Network. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Tomorrow night, Greg Hausch. Until then, I want everybody to be safe. Gobekli Tepe.